The whispered conversation at table 3 made Emily Chen's blood freeze. She had been reshelfing returns in the biography section of Millbrook Public Library when she caught fragments of Russian being spoken in hushed tones near the periodicals. Her fingers tightened around the spine of Theodore Roosevelt's autobiography as she strained to listen without appearing obvious. The words were clinical, professional, and absolutely terrifying. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Target confirmed. Residential address verified. Extraction window opens at midnight. Emily's training kicked in instantly. After 8 years of peaceful anonymity in this sleepy Montana town, her past had finally caught up with her. The two men at the table looked like ordinary travelers, complete with hiking boots and tourist maps spread across the wooden surface. But Emily's trained eye caught the subtle tells, the way the older man's jacket hung slightly heavier on one side, the younger one's constant scanning of exits, the positioning of their chairs to maintain clear sight lines. She had perhaps 6 hours before they made their move. 6 hours to decide whether to run again or make her final stand in the place she had come to call home. The irony wasn't lost on her. Emily Chen, former CIA operative with 47 confirmed eliminations, had spent the last 8 years checking out romance novels, organizing children's story time, and helping elderly residents navigate the computer lab. The most dangerous weapon she'd handled recently was a stapler with a temperamental spring. Yet here she was, recognized by foreign intelligence operatives in a town where the biggest crime was usually teenagers tagging the water tower. As she continued her shelving, moving with deliberate calm through the stacks, Emily's mind raced through contingencies she hadn't considered in years. The peaceful life she'd built in Millbrook was about to shatter, and everyone she'd grown to care about was potentially in danger. Emily Chen had never intended to come invisible, but 8 years of small-town library work had accomplished what the CIA's best cover specialists never could. At 34, she had perfected the art of being unremarkable. Her black hair was always pulled back in a practical bun. Her wardrobe consisted entirely of cardigans and sensible flats, and her most animated moments involved explaining the intricacies of the Dewey Decimal System to confused patrons. The residents of Millbrook, Montana knew Emily as the quiet librarian who had arrived from Portland 8 years ago, seeking the peaceful pace of small-town life after a vaguely mentioned career in government administration. She lived alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment above Main Street Coffee, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, and had never been seen on a date. Her life was a carefully constructed monument to ordinary. What they didn't know was that Emily Chen was a ghost. Not literally, though there had been times during her CIA career when the distinction felt academic. Her real name was classified, her birth record sealed, and her official death had been documented in a car accident outside Kabul 7 years ago. The woman who stamped due dates and organized book clubs had once been the agency's most effective wet work specialist, responsible for eliminating high-value targets across 3 continents. The transformation hadn't been voluntary. Emily's extraction from active duty had come suddenly, the result of a blown operation in Eastern Europe that had cost the lives of her entire team. She'd been given a choice: disappear forever or face congressional hearings that would expose decades of covert operations. The agency had made it clear which option they preferred. Millbrook had been selected by her handlers as the perfect hiding place. Population 3,500, isolated by 90 miles of mountain roads from the nearest city, and economically dependent on tourism and logging. The kind of place where newcomers were welcomed but not interrogated, where everyone minded their own business, and where a woman could reinvent herself without drawing unwanted attention. The Millbrook Public Library had been the perfect cover. Built in 1923 with Carnegie funding, The red brick building sat prominently on Main Street, its tall windows offering clear views of the town's primary thoroughfare. Emily had been hired within a week of her arrival, her fabricated credentials and references smoothly handling the minimal background check conducted by head librarian Janet Martinez. Janet, a cheerful woman in her 50s who had run the library for 23 years, had been delighted to have help from someone with Emily's supposed experience in municipal administration. She'd given Emily free rein to modernize their systems, never questioning her new employees' uncanny ability to navigate complex databases or her insistence on personally handling all technology upgrades. The work had been mind-numbing at first. After years of high-stakes operations where mistakes meant death, Emily found herself struggling to care about overdue book fines and printer maintenance. But gradually, something unexpected happened. The rhythms of library life began to heal wounds she hadn't realized were still bleeding. There was something profoundly peaceful about the morning ritual of opening the heavy wooden doors, turning on the lights that cast warm pools across the polished floors, and breathing in the familiar scent of books and furniture polish. The predictability was soothing after years of never knowing whether she'd see another sunrise. Emily had thrown herself into the role with the same methodical precision she'd once applied to surveillance operations. She memorized every patron's reading preferences, learned the genealogy of half the town's families, and became the unofficial tech support specialist for anyone over 60. Her apartment reflected the same careful attention to detail, furnished with pieces from the local antique shop, decorated with landscape photographs from the surrounding mountains, and maintained with the kind of cleanliness that suggested habit rather than obsession. The relationship she'd built in Millbrook represented the first genuine human connections she'd experienced in over a decade. Janet had become something approaching a mother figure, always worried about Emily's social life and constantly trying to set her up with the town's few eligible bachelors. Sarah Williams, the 22-year-old library assistant, treated Emily like the older sister she'd never had, constantly seeking advice about everything from college applications to relationship drama. Even the regular patrons had become part of Emily's carefully constructed normal life. Robert Thompson, a gruff retired veteran who came in every Tuesday for military history books, had gradually opened up to her about his service in Vietnam. Lisa Parker, who owned the coffee shop downstairs, had become Emily's closest friend. Their weekly dinner dates providing the kind of casual companionship Emily had never experienced. The children's story time sessions had been particularly transformative. Every Thursday afternoon, Emily would sit cross-legged on the colorful rug in the children's section, surrounded by a dozen kids ranging from toddlers to third graders. Their unguarded enthusiasm and complete trust had touched something in Emily that she'd thought was permanently damaged. She'd started volunteering for additional reading programs at the elementary school, finding genuine joy in watching young minds discover the magic of books. Sheriff Tom Bradley had been one of the few people who'd initially shown professional interest in Emily's background. A careful man in his late 40s, he'd made subtle inquiries during her first few months in town, the kind of gentle probing that suggested experience in law enforcement. Emily had navigated his questions with practiced ease, providing just enough personal history to satisfy curiosity without revealing anything substantial. Over time, Bradley had become an ally, often stopping by the library for coffee and casual conversation. He'd mentioned more than once that Emily had good instincts about people, praising her ability to diffuse situations when teenagers got rowdy or when heated town council discussions spilled over into the library's meeting room, if he noticed that she had an unusual awareness of her surroundings, or that she seemed to catalog everyone who entered and exited the building. He'd never commented on it. The town's social dynamics had been easier to navigate than Emily had expected. Millbrook was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business, but newcomers were generally given space to establish themselves. Emily's quiet competence and genuine helpfulness had earned Her acceptance without the need for elaborate backstory or extensive social maneuvering. She'd been invited to join the library board after just 2 years, served on the committee planning the annual Founders' Day festival, and had even been asked to run for town council, though she'd politely declined. Her integration into the community had been so complete that most residents couldn't imagine Millbrook without her. The carefully constructed life had its challenges. Emily's hypervigilance never fully relaxed, and she maintained escape routes and contingency plans that her neighbors would have found paranoid. Her apartment contained emergency supplies that had nothing to do with Montana winters and everything to do with hostile extraction scenarios. She practiced combat forms in the privacy of her living room, maintained her weapons proficiency at a remote shooting range 2 hours away, and kept her operational skills sharp through exercises disguised as hiking trips in the surrounding wilderness. But these were private precautions, hidden behind the mundane facade of small-town life. To everyone in Millbrook, Emily Chen was simply their dependable librarian, the woman who remembered their favorite authors, helped their children with research projects, and could be counted on to organize any community event with quiet efficiency. The disconnect between her public persona and her hidden capabilities had become so complete that Emily sometimes wondered if she'd successfully erased her former self entirely. There were weeks when she forgot to check for surveillance days, when she felt genuinely relaxed, moments when she believed she might actually be the person she pretended to be. That illusion had been shattered the moment she heard Russian being spoken at table 3. The language alone might have been coincidental. Millbrook saw its share of international tourists, especially during hiking season. But the clinical precision of the conversation, the professional terminology, and the way both men had positioned themselves for optimal observation of the library's interior had triggered recognition patterns Emily hadn't accessed in years. As she continued her shelving, moving with deliberate normalcy through the fiction section, Emily's mind automatically cataloged the tactical situation. 2 hostile operatives, both armed, positioned for surveillance and potential interdiction. Unknown backup locations, uncertain timeline, and a civilian environment that made any kind of confrontation extremely dangerous for innocent bystanders. The older operative, the one who seemed to be in charge, was approximately 50, with the kind of weathered face that suggested extensive field work. His younger companion couldn't have been more than 28, but moved with the controlled precision of someone accustomed to violence. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Both carried themselves with the subtle confidence of professionals who expected to be obeyed without question. Emily recognized the type immediately. She'd worked with similar operatives, had been trained by them, and had eliminated several when circumstances required. These weren't common criminals or local troublemakers. They were foreign intelligence operatives, almost certainly Russian based on their language, and they had somehow tracked her to Millbrook after 8 years of perfect operational security. The implications were staggering. If her location had been compromised, it meant her cover identity had been penetrated at the highest levels. Either someone within the agency had sold her out, or foreign intelligence services had developed capabilities that exceeded anything she'd encountered during her active career. Worse, their presence in Millbrook put everyone she'd come to care about at risk. The town's residents had no idea they were harboring a former CIA operative, no understanding of the kind of attention that might bring, and no preparation for the violence that could result from that exposure. As Emily reached the end of the fiction section, she glanced toward table 3 with practiced casualness. The 2 operatives were still there, still maintaining their cover as tourists while conducting what was clearly a final reconnaissance. The older one was photographing pages from a guidebook, but Emily could see he was actually documenting the library's layout, noting exits, sightlines, and potential defensive positions. The younger operative was ostensibly reading a local newspaper. But his eyes were constantly moving, cataloging patrons, staff, and the building's security measures. They were professionals conducting a professional operation, and Emily was their target. For the first time in 8 years, Emily Chen felt the familiar cold focus of impending violence settling over her consciousness. The peaceful librarian, who had checked out thousands of books and organized countless story times, was about to remember exactly who she used to be. The question was whether Millbrook would survive the reminder. The harassment began 3 days after Emily first spotted the Russian operatives. She had hoped their initial reconnaissance was an isolated incident, perhaps a case of mistaken identity that would resolve itself once they realized she posed no threat. That hope died when she arrived at the library Monday morning to find her office door slightly ajar, the lock showing subtle signs of professional tampering. Nothing appeared to be missing, but Emily's trained eye caught the microscopic displacements that indicated a thorough search. Her computer had been accessed, though whoever had done it was skilled enough to avoid leaving obvious traces. The personal items on her desk had been photographed and returned to positions that were almost identical to their original placement. Almost, but not quite. The message was clear. They knew exactly who she was, where she worked, and how to reach her whenever they chose. Viktor Kozlov had been watching Emily for 72 hours before making his first move. The Russian intelligence operative had arrived in Millbrook with a 4-person team and explicit instructions to extract or eliminate a high-value target who had been living under deep cover for nearly a decade. The orders had come from the highest levels of the SVR, signed by people whose names never appeared in newspapers and whose decisions shaped the fate of nations. Emily Chen, formerly known as Alexandra Petrov, during her infiltration of a Moscow weapons trafficking ring, had cost the Russian Federation millions in disrupted operations and eliminated assets. Her work had been precise, devastating, and personal. She had killed Victor's mentor, a man who had trained him from childhood, and her intelligence gathering had exposed 3 separate networks that had taken decades to establish. The Americans had officially declared her dead years ago, but Russian intelligence had never stopped looking. Patient surveillance of CIA safe houses, careful monitoring of financial networks, and the eventual recruitment of a mid-level agency accountant had finally yielded fruit. Alexandra Petrov was alive, living as Emily Chen, and working as a librarian in rural Montana. Victor's team had been assembled specifically for this mission. Marcus Webb, a corrupt county commissioner who had been compromised through gambling debts, provided local intelligence and official cover. Alexei Petrov, no relation to Emily's former identity, served as the team's technical specialist and surveillance coordinator. Nina Volkov handled infiltration and psychological operations, her unassuming appearance and fluent English making her ideal for blending into small-town American life. The initial plan had been straightforward: confirm the target's identity, establish her routines, and execute a clean extraction during a period when her disappearance would go unnoticed for several days. Rural Montana provided the perfect environment for such an operation, with its isolated location, minimal law enforcement presence, and tight-knit community that would assume a missing person had simply gone on an unannounced trip. But Victor had underestimated both his target and the complexity of her integration into Millbrook's social fabric. 8 years of genuine community involvement had made Emily Chen more than just a resident. She had become an essential part of the town's daily life. Her sudden disappearance would trigger immediate concern and investigation, making the clean extraction impossible. The psychological approach began with subtle infiltration of Emily's routine. Nina Volkov arrived in town posing as a freelance journalist researching rural library systems for a national magazine. Her cover was perfect, complete with business cards, a professional website, and references that would satisfy any casual investigation. She spent her first week interviewing Janet Martinez about the library's history and community role, establishing herself as a legitimate visitor with professional interests. During these interviews, Nina carefully gathered intelligence about Emily's relationships, responsibilities, and daily patterns. She learned about the Thursday story times, the monthly book club meetings, Emily's friendship with Lisa Parker, and her volunteer work at the elementary school. Every detail was cataloged and analyzed for potential leverage. The pressure campaign began with seemingly innocent disruptions. Emily's apartment building experienced a series of minor technical failures that required her to be present during repairs. Her internet service suffered intermittent outages that coincided with important library projects. Her car developed mysterious mechanical problems that necessitated multiple trips to the local garage, each one eating into her carefully managed schedule. Nina's approach was more sophisticated than simple harassment. She began attending the library regularly, asking detailed questions about Emily's background, expressing curiosity about her previous work in government administration, and probing for inconsistencies in her cover story. The questions were always framed as friendly interest from a fellow professional, but Emily recognized the interrogation techniques immediately. The journalist's presence created a ripple effect throughout the community. Other residents began asking Emily about the magazine article, wondering if their library would be featured in a national publication. Janet Martinez was excited about the potential publicity, constantly asking Emily to make herself available for additional interviews. The attention was exactly what Emily had spent 8 years avoiding. Marcus Webb's role in the operation became apparent when Emily encountered unexpected bureaucratic obstacles. Her library's annual budget request was suddenly flagged for additional review, requiring Emily to attend multiple county commission meetings to justify routine expenditures. Her volunteer background checks for the elementary school reading program were delayed indefinitely, forcing her to suspend activities that had become central to her community identity. The harassment extended beyond official channels. Emily's mail delivery became erratic, with important correspondence arriving late or not at all. Her utilities required constant attention, with technicians needing access to her apartment at inconvenient hours. Her phone service experienced disruptions that made it difficult to maintain communication with friends and colleagues. Alexei Petrov's technical expertise made Emily's digital life increasingly unstable. Her computer at the library developed software conflicts that required frequent restarts and system diagnostics. Her personal laptop suffered from mysterious malware infections that consumed hours of troubleshooting. Her online banking required constant verification procedures that suggested someone was attempting to access her accounts. The psychological pressure was carefully calibrated to create stress without triggering obvious alarm. Each incident was individually explainable as routine technical failure or administrative oversight, but the cumulative effect was exhausting. Emily found herself spending increasing amounts of time dealing with problems that had never existed during her first 8 years in Millbrook. Victor's team monitored Emily's responses to the pressure campaign with professional interest. They noted her increasing vigilance, her subtle changes in routine, and her growing isolation from community activities. The goal was to wear down her psychological defenses while gathering intelligence about her current capabilities and resources. The operation's scope expanded when Victor realized that Emily's integration into the community represented both an opportunity and a vulnerability. Her relationships with local residents could be leveraged to force compliance, but they also provided her with potential allies and resources that complicated any direct approach. Nina Volkov began cultivating relationships with Emily's closest associates. She struck up conversations with Lisa Parker about the challenges of running a small business in a tourist town, gradually steering discussions toward topics that might reveal Emily's personal life. She volunteered to help with the library's computer systems, offering technical assistance that allowed her to install sophisticated monitoring software. The journalist's investigation expanded to include other community members. She interviewed Sheriff Bradley about crime rates and security concerns, probing for information about any unusual incidents or residents who might have law enforcement backgrounds. She spoke with teachers at the elementary school about their reading programs, fishing for details about Emily's volunteer work and her interactions with children. Marcus Webb used his position to create administrative pressure that extended beyond Emily herself. The library's operating license was subjected to an unexpected compliance review that required extensive documentation and staff interviews. The building's safety certification was questioned, necessitating costly inspections and potential renovations. Even the library's insurance policy was flagged for review, threatening to interrupt operations entirely. The harassment campaign reached a new level when Emily's personal relationships became targets. Lisa Parker's coffee shop was subjected to health department inspections that found violations that had never been issues before. Janet Martinez received criticism from the town council about the library's budget management, suggesting that Emily's financial oversight was inadequate. Sarah Williams, Emily's young assistant, became a particular focus of the operation. Nina Volkov befriended the 22-year-old through casual conversations about career opportunities and educational goals. Sarah's social media accounts were monitored, her academic records accessed, and her family history researched for potential leverage points. The psychological warfare extended to Emily's living situation. Her apartment building's owner received anonymous complaints about noise and property maintenance that required Emily to participate in mediation sessions. Her neighbors were questioned about her activities, her visitors, and her general behavior, creating an atmosphere of surveillance and suspicion. Victor's team employed techniques designed to isolate Emily from her support network while gathering intelligence about her defensive capabilities. They noted her careful observation of surroundings, her subtle security measures, and her avoidance of situations that might compromise her cover. Each behavior was analyzed for insights into her training and current operational status. The pressure campaign created unintended consequences that complicated the operation. Emily's obvious stress and the increasing problems affecting her work generated genuine concern from community members who had grown to care about her. Janet Martinez began asking pointed questions about Emily's well-being, while Sheriff Bradley started paying closer attention to the unusual incidents affecting the library and its staff. Robert Thompson, the retired veteran who had become a regular patron, noticed changes in Emily's demeanor that triggered his own professional instincts. His casual conversations began probing for details about her background, not from suspicion, but from a protective instinct that recognized someone under pressure. His military experience had taught him to identify operational stress, and Emily was exhibiting classic symptoms. The operation's timeline was accelerated when Victor realized that the pressure campaign was having unintended effects. Instead of isolating Emily and wearing down her defenses, the harassment was strengthening her connections to the community and attracting attention from individuals who might have the experience to recognize what was happening. Nina Volkov's cover began showing strain when her constant questions and presence started generating suspicion from the very people she was trying to cultivate. Lisa Parker mentioned to several friends that the journalist seemed unusually interested in Emily's personal life for someone supposedly researching library systems. Janet Martinez began wondering why the magazine article required such extensive investigation of individual staff members. The technical aspects of the operation also faced challenges. Emily's professional background had provided her with cybersecurity awareness that made Alexei Petrov's infiltration efforts more difficult than anticipated. She had implemented security measures on her personal devices that suggested more sophisticated knowledge than a small-town librarian should possess. Victor's surveillance revealed that Emily maintained contact with individuals outside Millbrook through encrypted communication channels that required significant technical skill to establish and maintain. Her shopping patterns included purchases that suggested she was maintaining emergency supplies and escape resources that went far beyond normal preparedness. The operation's complexity increased when the team discovered that Emily's cover identity had been constructed with resources that indicated high-level agency support. Her background documentation was too perfect, her financial history too clean, and her integration into the community too smooth to be the result of individual planning. Marcus Webb's position provided access to county records that revealed anomalies. In Emily's initial arrival in Millbrook, her apartment had been secured through a property management company that existed only on paper. Her job application had been supported by references that couldn't be independently verified, and her financial accounts showed transaction patterns that suggested professional money laundering. The harassment campaign reached its peak when Victor decided to test Emily's operational capabilities directly. The team began following her more openly, appearing at locations she frequented, and making their presence known in ways that would be obvious to someone with intelligence training. Emily's response to the escalating pressure confirmed Victor's assessment of her capabilities. She began varying her routes, implementing counter-surveillance measures, and establishing communication protocols that suggested she was preparing for either escape or confrontation. Her behavior patterns indicated someone with extensive training in covert operations who was transitioning from defensive to offensive posture. The systematic opposition had achieved its goal of confirming Emily's identity and capabilities, but it had also created a situation that was spiraling beyond Victor's control. The community's growing concern about Emily's well-being, the increasing attention from local law enforcement, and Emily's own preparation for conflict had transformed a simple extraction operation into a complex scenario that threatened to expose the entire team. Victor realized that the psychological approach had reached its limits. Emily Chen was not going to break under pressure, was not going to flee without a fight, and was not going to allow herself to be quietly eliminated. The operation would have to move to its next phase, and that phase would require direct confrontation with a target who had just been given weeks to prepare for exactly that possibility. The systematic opposition had succeeded in one crucial respect. It had forced Emily to reveal her true nature to anyone trained to recognize the signs. But it had also provided her with time to remember skills she had spent 8 years trying to forget, and to prepare for a battle that would determine not just her own fate, but the safety of everyone in Millbrook she had come to call family. The breaking point came on a Thursday morning when Emily arrived at the library to find Sarah Williams missing. The young woman's absence might have been unremarkable under normal circumstances, but the cryptic text message on Emily's phone made her blood run cold. "Your assistant is enjoying our hospitality. Main Street Coffee, 1 hour. Come alone." Emily stared at the message, her mind automatically shifting into operational mode. The game had moved beyond psychological pressure into direct threat, and the people she cared about were now being used as leverage. Every instinct screamed at her to contact law enforcement, to call in federal resources, to do anything except walk into an obvious trap. But Sarah's safety eliminated all other considerations. The hour that followed was a masterclass in preparation under pressure. Emily moved through the library with practiced calm, her actions appearing routine to any observer, while actually implementing protocols she had hoped never to use again. She disabled the building's security system using access codes that officially didn't exist, retrieved emergency supplies from hiding places that had been undisturbed for years, and sent encrypted messages to contacts who had assumed she was dead. Her hands moved with mechanical precision as she accessed the hidden compartment behind the biography section. The space contained items that had no place in a small-town library: encrypted communication devices, emergency currency, and a Glock 19 that she had maintained but never expected to need. The weight of the weapon felt alien after 8 years of peaceful domesticity, yet her muscle memory recognized its familiar balance with uncomfortable ease. Emily's reflection in the library's bathroom mirror showed a woman in transition. The fondue. Soft features of the helpful librarian were hardening into something more dangerous, her posture straightening with military bearing that had been carefully suppressed for nearly a decade. She was becoming someone she had tried to leave behind, and the transformation was as terrifying as it was necessary. The walk to Main Street Coffee covered less than 200 yards, but Emily treated it as a tactical approach to a hostile zone. She identified 3 potential escape routes, noted the positions of parked vehicles that could provide cover, and cataloged the locations of innocent bystanders who might be endangered by violence. The familiar streets of Millbrook had become a battlefield, and she was entering it alone. Lisa Parker's coffee shop occupied the ground floor of a historic building that had once housed the town's first bank. The large windows that normally provided cheerful views of Main Street now represented dangerous exposure points. Emily could see Nina Volkov seated at a corner table, her journalist cover apparently abandoned in favor of more direct intimidation. The bell above the door chimed with false normalcy as Emily entered. The morning rush had ended, leaving only a handful of customers scattered throughout the space. Sarah Williams sat at a table near the back, her eyes wide with fear but otherwise appearing unharmed. The young woman's presence confirmed that this was indeed a trap, but also provided Emily with the motivation she needed to see it through. Nina Volkov looked up from her newspaper with a smile that held no warmth. "Miss Chen, thank you for coming. Please have a seat. Your friend is quite charming, though she asks too many questions about your background." The Russian operatives. Accent was barely noticeable, but Emily's trained ear caught the subtle inflections that confirmed her suspicions about the woman's origins. Emily remained standing, her position carefully chosen to provide optimal angles for both observation and action. "Let her go. Whatever you want from me, she's not part of it." Her voice carried the flat authority of someone accustomed to giving orders in life or death situations, a tone that had been absent from her speech for 8 years. The negotiation that followed was a carefully orchestrated performance, designed to draw Emily into a more compromising position. Nina explained that her organization simply wanted to discuss Emily's previous work, to reach an understanding about certain operations that had caused significant disruption to legitimate business interests. The language was diplomatic, but the underlying threat was clear: cooperate or face consequences that would extend far beyond her own safety. Emily's response was equally measured. She acknowledged that misunderstandings sometimes occurred in international business, that certain activities might have been perceived as problematic, and that reasonable people could generally reach reasonable solutions. But her positioning in the coffee shop never wavered, and her attention remained focused on Sarah's well-being rather than the proposed negotiations. The conversation continued for 20 minutes, each participant probing for weaknesses while maintaining the facade of civilized discussion. Other customers came and went, unaware that they were witnessing a confrontation between trained operatives who could kill with their bare hands. Lisa Parker continued serving coffee behind the counter, her presence adding an additional layer of complexity to an already dangerous situation. The illusion of diplomatic discourse shattered when Viktor Kozlov entered the coffee shop. The Russian operative's presence transformed the atmosphere from tense negotiation to immediate threat. His eyes found Emily's with the recognition of a professional adversary, and his slight nod acknowledged the respect that existed between skilled opponents, even in hostile circumstances. "Alexandra Petrov," Viktor said, using Emily's former identity. With deliberate precision, "It has been a long time." His English was accented but fluent, and his tone carried the weight of personal grievance rather than professional duty. Emily realized that this confrontation was about more than recovering a valuable asset. It was about settling old scores. The revelation of Emily's true identity in front of Sarah Williams added another layer of complexity to the situation. The fade Young woman's confusion was obvious, but her intelligence allowed her to understand that her mentor was not who she appeared to be. The betrayal in Sarah's eyes was almost as painful as the physical danger surrounding them. Emily's acknowledgement of her former identity was delivered with the same calm professionalism she had shown throughout the encounter. That name belonged to someone else in a different life. I'm Emily Chen now, and I've been Emily Chen for 8 years. Whatever business you had with Alexandra Petrov ended when she died in that car accident outside Kabul. Victor's laugh held no humor. Official records can be manipulated, but certain debts remain outstanding regardless of bureaucratic convenience. Your work in Moscow cost us more than money or operations. You cost us people who cannot be replaced. The personal nature of his grievance explained the resources that had been committed to tracking her down after so many years. The confrontation escalated when Marcus Webb entered the coffee shop, his presence confirming that the trap extended beyond the immediate location. Emily recognized the corrupt official from her research into local government, but his involvement with foreign operatives added a dimension of betrayal that made the situation even more dangerous. The corruption of local officials meant that normal channels of assistance were compromised. Sarah Williams' safety became the focal point of the negotiation as Victor made his demands explicit. Emily would accompany his team voluntarily, submit to questioning about her previous operations, and provide information that would allow his organization to recover from the damage she had caused. In return, Sarah would be released unharmed, and the people of Millbrook would be left in peace. The choice was designed to leverage Emily's emotional attachments against her survival instincts. 8 years of building relationships and caring about people had created vulnerabilities that her former self would never have accepted. The cold logic of operational security demanded that she prioritize her own survival over the safety of others. But Emily Chen could not abandon Sarah Williams to save Alexandra Petrov. Emily's acceptance of Victor's terms was conditional on guarantees that extended beyond Sarah's immediate safety. She demanded assurances that no one else in Millbrook would be harmed, that her friends and colleagues would be left alone, and that the town itself would not suffer consequences for harboring her. The negotiations revealed the depth of her integration into the community and the genuine affection she felt for people who had welcomed her without question. The logistics of the proposed exchange were complicated by the public nature of the coffee shop and the increasing attention their prolonged conversation was attracting. Lisa Parker had begun showing signs of concern about the intense discussion taking place in her establishment, and other customers were starting to notice the tension in the air. Victor's impatience became apparent as he established a deadline for Emily's compliance. She would have until midnight to arrange her affairs and prepare for departure. The timeline was designed to prevent her from seeking outside assistance, while providing enough time for her to convince herself that cooperation was her only option. Emily's response to the ultimatum revealed the tactical thinking that had made her such an effective operative. She accepted the deadline but established conditions that would allow her to verify Sarah's safety and ensure that the town's residents were genuinely protected. Her demands were phrased as requests, but her tone made clear that they were non-negotiable requirements. The meeting concluded with Victor's team departing separately to avoid drawing additional attention. Sarah Williams was released with instructions to return to her normal activities and to avoid discussing the morning's events with anyone. The young woman's confusion and fear were evident, but her loyalty to Emily prevented her from immediately seeking help from law enforcement. Emily remained in the coffee shop for another hour, ostensibly reading a book while actually conducting surveillance of the surrounding area. Her casual conversation with Lisa Parker served dual purposes, maintaining the appearance of normalcy, while gathering intelligence about any unusual activity in the vicinity. The afternoon that followed was a carefully orchestrated performance as Emily went through the motions of her normal routine while actually preparing for what she knew would be a life-or-death confrontation. She conducted her regular library duties with mechanical precision, her interactions with patrons maintaining the facade of the helpful librarian, while her mind focused on tactical planning. Her meeting with Janet Martinez about the following week's schedule was particularly difficult. The head librarian's genuine concern about Emily's apparent stress, combined with her complete ignorance of the dangers surrounding the library, created a painful contrast between Emily's public persona and her hidden reality. The lies necessary to maintain her cover felt like additional betrayals of people who had shown her nothing but kindness. The preparation phase involved accessing resources that Emily had hoped never to use again. Her apartment was transformed from a modest home into a staging area for covert operations. Hidden compartments revealed surveillance equipment, communication devices, and weapons that had been maintained in perfect condition despite years of disuse. Emily's contact with her former handlers was conducted through encrypted channels that had been established as emergency protocols. The responses she received were both reassuring and terrifying. Support was available, but utilizing it would require her to abandon her carefully constructed life in Millbrook forever. The choice between safety and belonging was starker than she had anticipated. The tactical assessment of Victor's team revealed capabilities that exceeded Emily's initial estimates. Their surveillance of the town had been comprehensive, their infiltration of local systems sophisticated, and their preparation for confrontation thorough. The opposition she faced was professional, well-equipped, and motivated by personal grievance rather than mere operational objectives. Emily's counter-surveillance revealed the extent of the trap that had been laid for her. The town was being watched from multiple positions, communication channels were being monitored, and escape routes were being covered by operatives who had been positioned over several days. The confrontation that awaited her had been planned with the same precision she had once applied to her own operations. The psychological preparation for returning to violence was perhaps the most difficult aspect of Emily's transformation. 8 years of peaceful existence had not eliminated her lethal capabilities, but it had created emotional barriers that made the prospect of killing deeply disturbing. The librarian who read stories to children would have to become the operative who ended lives with clinical efficiency. As evening approached, Emily found herself standing in the library after hours, surrounded by the books and memories that had defined her life in Millbrook. The building that had been her sanctuary was about to become either her fortress or her tomb. The choice between Emily Chen and Alexandra Petrov was no longer theoretical. It was a decision that would determine not just her own fate, but the safety of everyone she had come to love. The unavoidable challenge had been set, the terms established, and the timeline fixed. Emily Chen would have to become Alexandra Petrov once more, but this time she would be fighting not just for her own survival, but for the right to remain the person she had chosen to become. The confrontation that awaited her would determine whether 8 years of peaceful existence had been a temporary reprieve or the foundation for a genuinely new life. The clock on the library wall showed 9:15 as Emily made her final preparations. In less than 3 hours, she would discover whether the deadly skills she had tried to leave behind were still sharp enough to protect the innocent life she had built in their absence. Midnight came and went without incident. Emily had expected Victor's team to make their move precisely at the deadline, but the silence that stretched through the early morning hours suggested a more sophisticated approach. She waited in her apartment, every sense heightened by adrenaline and training that had never truly faded until the first hint of dawn painted the eastern mountains in shades of gold and crimson. The attack came at 6:30 in the morning, during the vulnerable transition between night and day when human alertness naturally diminished. Emily heard the subtle sounds of forced entry through her apartment building's rear access, the soft footsteps in the hallway that moved with professional stealth, and the almost inaudible click of electronic devices being deployed to disable building security systems. Victor's team had chosen their moment perfectly. Most of Millbrook's residents were still asleep. Main Street was deserted except for early delivery trucks, and the town's minimal police presence was focused on the highway patrol station, 15 miles away. The isolation that had once made Emily feel safe now worked against her, providing the perfect environment for a covert operation. Emily moved through her apartment with practiced silence, gathering the gear she had prepared while monitoring the sounds of infiltration. Her transformation was complete now. Every movement reflected years of combat training. Every decision filtered through operational priorities that had nothing to do with the gentle librarian she had been for 8 years. Alexandra Petrov was fully awake, and she was ready for war. The first breach came through her living room window, a silent entry that would have been invisible to civilian observation. Emily watched from her concealed position in the bedroom. As a figure in tactical gear moved through her space with professional competence, clearing angles and identifying potential threats. The operative's movements were textbook perfect, but Emily had written some of those textbooks. Her counterattack was surgical in its precision. Emily emerged from concealment as the intruder passed her position, her approach completely silent until the moment her arm locked around his throat. The sleeper hold was applied with mathematical precision, cutting off blood flow to the brain, without allowing the target to make any sound. The operative went limp in exactly 7 seconds, his body collapsing to the floor with barely a whisper. The unconscious man's equipment revealed the sophistication of Victor's operation. Military-grade communication devices, weapons that weren't available through civilian channels, and surveillance technology that suggested backing from a major intelligence service. Emily appropriated what she could use while disabling the rest. Her movements efficient and silent as she prepared for the next phase of the engagement. The building's fire escape provided her primary route of egress, but Emily's tactical assessment suggested that it would be under observation. Instead, she chose a more unconventional approach, using the building's old elevator shaft to reach the basement level. The abandoned machinery room connected to a utility tunnel that ran beneath Main Street, a piece of infrastructure that most residents had forgotten, but that Emily had noted during her first week in Millbrook. The tunnel system dated to the town's founding, originally designed to carry steam heat between buildings during Montana's brutal winters. Emily navigated the narrow passages by memory and touch, her small frame allowing her to move through spaces that would have been impassable for larger operatives. The route brought her up through the basement of Thompson's hardware store, 3 blocks from her apartment building. Robert Thompson was already in his store when Emily emerged from the basement, his early morning routine disrupted by the sound of movement below the main floor. The retired veteran's reaction to finding an armed woman in tactical gear ascending from his cellar was remarkably calm, his military experience allowing him to process unusual situations without panic. Emily's explanation was necessarily brief and incomplete, but Robert's questions revealed that he had already suspected something unusual about the quiet librarian. Her knowledge of military terminology, her unconscious adoption of tactical positions during conversation, and her obvious familiarity with weapons had triggered recognition patterns in someone trained to identify fellow professionals. The alliance that formed between them was instantaneous and unspoken. Robert's combat experience in Vietnam had taught him to recognize operational stress and to trust his instincts about people under pressure. Emily's obvious competence and the genuine concern in her voice when she mentioned threats to the town's residents convinced him that whatever was happening, she was on the right side. Robert's store provided access to tools and supplies that enhanced Emily's tactical options. Hunting rifles, ammunition, communication radios, and outdoor gear transformed the hardware store into an improvised armory. More importantly, Robert's knowledge of the town's layout, his relationships with other residents, and his understanding of local law enforcement capabilities provided Emily with intelligence that could prove crucial. The morning's first casualty occurred when Alexei Petrov attempted to infiltrate the library building. The technical specialist had underestimated the security measures that Emily had discreetly installed over 8 years of residence. His electronic surveillance equipment triggered alarms that were designed to appear as routine building maintenance issues, but actually alerted Emily to the exact nature and location of the intrusion. Emily's response was swift and decisive. She used the library's internal communication system to track Alexei's movements through the building, then employed the environmental controls to create conditions that forced him into a predetermined location. The children's reading area, with its single entrance and limited sightlines, became a killing ground where Emily's advantages in familiarity and preparation overcome any technological superiority. The confrontation lasted less than 90 seconds. Alexei's focus on his electronic equipment made him vulnerable to physical attack, and his reliance on technology blinded him to the more primitive threat approaching from his flank. Emily's knife work was clinical and efficient, ending the threat while minimizing noise that might alert other operatives or innocent bystanders. The death of his technical specialist forced Victor to accelerate his timeline and abandon the subtle approach that had characterized the operation's early phases. The Russian operative's personal investment in capturing Emily alive was overcome by practical considerations. If Alexandra Petrov could not be taken, she would have to be eliminated before she could escape or call for outside assistance. Nina Volkov's assignment was to secure the coffee shop and use Lisa Parker as additional leverage against Emily's cooperation. The journalist's cover was completely abandoned now, replaced by the efficient violence of a trained operative who had eliminated targets across 3 continents. Her approach to the building was professional and confident, based on intelligence that suggested Lisa was an ordinary civilian who would surrender immediately when confronted with lethal force. The intelligence was fatally flawed. Lisa Parker's background included 2 tours as a military medic in Afghanistan, experiences that had taught her to function under extreme stress and to recognize threats that most civilians would miss. Her coffee shop's location on Main Street had been chosen specifically for its tactical advantages, and her daily routines included security measures that she had never discussed with anyone in Millbrook. The battle for Main Street coffee demonstrated the difference between intelligence gathered from surveillance and the reality of confronting prepared opponents on familiar ground. Nina's entry into the building was textbook perfect, but Lisa's response revealed training that hadn't appeared in any background check. The former medic's knowledge of human anatomy, combined with her familiarity with the building's layout, created a situation where professional killing skills met practical experience and local knowledge. Emily arrived at the coffee shop to find Nina Volkov unconscious and Lisa Parker calmly applying pressure bandages to wounds that would heal without permanent damage. The sight of her friend efficiently managing the aftermath of violence was both shocking and oddly reassuring, revealing capabilities that Emily had never suspected but immediately recognized. Lisa's explanation was delivered with the same matter-of-fact tone she used to describe coffee preparation. Her military service had ended with a medical discharge after an IED explosion, but her training had never faded. The coffee shop's defensive preparations had been implemented gradually over several years, disguised as routine renovations and equipment upgrades that served dual purposes. The revelation transformed Emily's understanding of Millbrook's residents and her own situation. The isolated town that had seemed populated entirely by innocent civilians actually contained multiple individuals with combat experience and defensive capabilities. Robert Thompson's military background was obvious once revealed, but Lisa Parker's hidden competence suggested that other residents might possess similar undisclosed skills. Sheriff Tom Bradley's arrival at the coffee shop was precipitated by automated alerts from the building's security system, but his response revealed knowledge of Emily's true identity that had been carefully concealed for 8 years. The lawman's casual reference to federal protocols and his Familiarity with operational terminology indicated connections that extended far beyond rural law enforcement. Bradley's explanation redefined the entire situation. Millbrook's selection as Emily's hiding place had not been random. It had been chosen specifically because certain residents could provide support and protection if her cover was ever blown. The town's isolation was genuine, but its defenselessness was an illusion maintained to deter attention from potential threats. The network of former military and intelligence personnel living in Millbrook under various covers was revealed as Emily's situation escalated beyond individual capability. Janet Martinez's background included cryptographic work for the NSA, her librarian credentials supplemented by expertise in information security that explained the library's unusually sophisticated computer systems. Sarah Williams, the young assistant whose kidnapping had triggered the morning's violence, was revealed to be the daughter of a CI analyst who had been placed in Millbrook as part of a long-term security arrangement. Her presence in Emily's life had not been coincidental, but rather a carefully orchestrated element of a protection network that had been monitoring potential threats for years. The town's defensive capabilities were activated as Victor's operation expanded beyond covert surveillance into open violence. Communication networks that appeared to be routine emergency services actually connected to federal resources, while residents who seemed to be ordinary retirees revealed military experience that turned Millbrook into a fortified position rather than a vulnerable target. Victor's realization that he had walked into a trap rather than setting one marked the operation's turning point. The Russian team's intelligence had focused on Emily's individual capabilities and civilian cover, missing the broader security infrastructure that surrounded her. The town that had appeared to be an isolated target was actually a carefully prepared defensive position. The morning's violence had revealed the true nature of Millbrook's population, but it had also forced Emily to acknowledge that her peaceful existence had been an illusion, maintained by others rather than a genuine escape from her past. The safety she had felt was real, but it had been provided by a network of protectors rather than achieved through successful hiding. Marcus Webb's attempt to coordinate the Russian operation with local law enforcement collapsed when his corrupt connections proved to be part of an elaborate counterintelligence operation. The county officials he believed he had compromised were actually feeding information to federal authorities, turning his insider access into a liability that exposed Victor's entire plan. The revelation that Millbrook was essentially a retirement community for intelligence operatives and military specialists recontextualized Emily's 8 years of peaceful existence. Her integration into the community had been genuine, but it had occurred within an environment specifically designed to support people with her background and security requirements. Emily's acceptance of her true identity became complete as she stood in the center of Main Street, surrounded by neighbors who were revealing their own hidden capabilities. The gentle librarian who had read stories to children was indeed Emily Chen, but Emily Chen was also Alexandra Petrov, and both identities were equally valid aspects of a person who had found a place where she could be complete. The transformation was not about choosing between her past and present, but about integrating both into a unified identity that could protect the community that had protected her. The deadly skills she had tried to leave behind were not separate from the nurturing instincts she had developed, but rather complementary aspects of someone capable of both creation and destruction. Victor's final assault on the town was met by organized resistance that demonstrated the difference between attacking isolated individuals and confronting a prepared community. The Russian operative found himself outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and fighting on terrain that had been specifically prepared for exactly this type of threat. The battle for Millbrook revealed Emily's true capabilities not just as an individual operative, but as a leader capable of coordinating defensive operations while protecting civilian populations. Her tactical knowledge, combined with intimate familiarity with the town's geography and the capabilities of its residents, created advantages that overcame any technological or numerical superiority Victor's team might have possessed. The truth about Emily Chen, Alexandra Petrov, and the town of Millbrook was finally complete. The revelation changed everything and nothing, exposing hidden realities, while confirming the genuine relationships and peaceful existence that had made the deception both necessary and worthwhile. 3 months after the battle for Millbrook, Emily Chen stood before a Congressional Oversight Committee in a Washington, D.C. conference room that reeked of institutional coffee and recycled air. The mahogany table stretched between her and 12 senators whose understanding of covert operations came primarily from Hollywood movies and sanitized briefing documents. She had been summoned to explain how a supposedly Dead Sea operative had managed to expose a Russian intelligence network while protecting a classified safe haven. The questions were predictable and largely irrelevant. How had her cover been compromised? Why hadn't she followed extraction protocols? What damage had been done to ongoing operations? Emily answered each inquiry with professional precision, while her mind remained focused on more important considerations: the reconstruction of Millbrook's damaged buildings, the integration of new security measures, and the welfare of residents who had risked everything to protect her. Viktor Kozlov sat in a federal detention facility outside Quantico, his extraction back to Russia blocked by charges that would keep him in American custody for decades. The Russian operative's capture had provided intelligence services with their most significant counterintelligence breakthrough in years, revealing operational methods and agent networks that had operated undetected for decades. His surviving team members had been processed through different channels. Marcus Webb faced federal corruption charges that would effectively end his political career and result in significant prison time. Nina Volkov had been exchanged for an American asset. Held in Moscow, her professional capabilities respected even by those who had fought against her. The operations technical specialist would be buried in Millbrook's small cemetery, his death mourned only by family members who would never know the true circumstances of his demise. The congressional hearing represented the final administrative hurdle in Emily's transition from covert operative to acknowledged federal asset. Her official resurrection required extensive paperwork, medical evaluations, and psychological assessments that transformed 8 years of fictional death into bureaucratic reality. The process was tedious but necessary, providing legal framework for her continued existence within the intelligence community. Emily's testimony focused on the operational lessons learned rather than personal experiences. She described how small communities could serve as effective cover for intelligence assets, outlined the security vulnerabilities that had led to her exposure, and recommended protocols for protecting similar installations. Her presentation was clinical and professional, revealing nothing of the emotional transformation that had occurred during her time in Millbrook. The committee's final recommendation authorized the continuation of the Millbrook program under enhanced security protocols. Federal funding would support infrastructure improvements, resident screening processes, and emergency response capabilities that would prevent future penetrations. The town's cover as an ordinary rural community would be maintained, but its defensive capabilities would be significantly enhanced. Emily's return to Millbrook was delayed by medical procedures that addressed injuries sustained during the confrontation with Victor's team. The knife wound on her shoulder required surgery that left a scar intersecting with older marks from her operational career. Physical therapy sessions provided time for reflection about the integration of her dual identities and the future she wanted to build. The town that welcomed her back had been transformed by the revelation of its true nature. Residents who had maintained careful separation between their covers and their authentic selves now moved with the confidence of people who no longer needed to pretend. The change was subtle but profound, affecting everything from casual conversations to community planning. Robert Thompson had assumed an unofficial leadership role in coordinating the town's defensive improvements. His hardware store now served as a distribution center for equipment that had no legitimate civilian purpose, while his military experience provided tactical expertise for security planning. The gruff veteran who had once seemed isolated by his war experiences now found himself at the center of a community that understood and valued his capabilities. Lisa Parker's coffee shop had been rebuilt with architectural features that served dual purposes. The expanded seating area provided better sightlines and multiple exit routes, while the renovated kitchen included storage spaces for equipment that had nothing to do with food service. Her medical background had led to the establishment of a community clinic that could handle trauma cases without external assistance. Sheriff Bradley's role had evolved from local law enforcement to federal liaison. His department expanded with personnel whose credentials included experience far beyond rural policing. The sheriff's station now housed communication equipment that connected directly to intelligence agencies, while patrol procedures included protocols for identifying and responding to foreign operatives. Janet Martinez had revealed cryptographic skills that transformed the library into an information hub for the community's expanded security operations. The building's renovation included secure communication facilities and data storage capabilities that supported both civilian library functions and classified intelligence activities. Her management of the dual-purpose facility demonstrated expertise that exceeded anything suggested by her academic credentials. Sarah Williams had returned from a hastily arranged semester abroad with training that supplemented her natural intelligence with practical skills. Her kidnapping had been the catalyst for revealing Millbrook's true nature, but her resilience and adaptability had impressed federal evaluators who saw potential for future recruitment. Her relationship with Emily had evolved from mentorship to genuine partnership as both women navigated their complex identities. The integration of Emily's cover identity with her operational background required careful negotiation between federal agencies and local authorities. Her position as head librarian was officially maintained, but her responsibilities now included security consultation and training activities that utilized her expertise while maintaining plausible civilian justification. The children's story time sessions resumed with enhanced security measures that were invisible to young participants, but comprehensive in their protection. Emily's genuine affection for the children had not diminished during her transition back to operational status, and their trust in her remained unshaken by events they were too young to understand. The reading programs at Mountain View Elementary expanded to include security awareness training disguised as age-appropriate games and activities. Children learned to identify strangers, report unusual activities, and follow emergency procedures, without understanding the potentially lethal contexts that made such knowledge necessary. Their innocence was preserved while their safety was enhanced. Emily's relationship with the town's residents deepened as artificial barriers between their cover identities and authentic selves were gradually eliminated. Conversations that had once been carefully managed to avoid sensitive topics now included frank discussions about operational experiences, security concerns, and the challenges of maintaining civilian lives while retaining lethal capabilities. The monthly town council meetings became forums for coordinating community defense activities with routine municipal business. Budget discussions included allocations for equipment and training that served both legitimate community needs and security requirements. Planning decisions considered factors that extended far beyond normal small-town concerns. Victor's interrogation had revealed intelligence about other safe communities that led to security reviews across the federal protection network. Millbrook's successful defense had provided valuable lessons about community integration and mutual support that influenced policies governing similar installations. The town's motto was being replicated in other locations where retired operatives sought peaceful existences. Emily's romantic relationship with Daniel Foster developed slowly as both individuals navigated the complexities of lives built on necessary deceptions. The town mayor's background included military intelligence, experience that made him uniquely qualified to understand the challenges of transitioning from operational to civilian identities. Their courtship unfolded against the backdrop of community reconstruction and security enhancement. The couple's engagement was announced at the annual Founders' Day Festival, an event that had evolved to include celebrations of both the town's historical heritage and its contemporary role in national security. The festival's traditional activities continued alongside demonstrations of capabilities that most rural communities couldn't imagine possessing. Emily's wedding dress was carefully designed to conceal scars that mapped a career spent in service to national security, while Daniel's military decorations were displayed with pride that had been suppressed during years of maintaining civilian cover. Their ceremony represented not just personal commitment, but the successful integration of their professional and private identities. The honeymoon was spent in a cabin in the Cascade Mountains, and location chosen for its natural beauty and tactical advantages that allowed both newlyweds to relax without abandoning situational awareness entirely. Their conversations included planning for futures that balanced personal happiness with ongoing security responsibilities. Emily's pregnancy was announced 6 months after the wedding, generating excitement throughout Millbrook's close-knit community. The prospect of raising a child in an environment where deadly skills coexisted with genuine affection for young people represented a unique opportunity to demonstrate that peace and preparedness were not mutually exclusive. The baby's nursery was designed with security features that were invisible but comprehensive, while the child's early education would include elements that served both developmental and protective purposes. Emily's experiences as both a trained killer and a children's librarian provided unique perspectives on nurturing young minds while preparing them for potentially dangerous realities. The community's evolution continued as new residents arrived through carefully managed relocation programs. Each addition to Millbrook's population was vetted through extensive background checks that ensured compatibility with the town's unique culture and security requirements. The integration process included orientation programs that explained both the benefits and responsibilities of life in a protected community. Emily's role in training new residents drew on her experiences in both covert operations and civilian life. Her curriculum included practical skills for maintaining cover identities alongside tactical knowledge for responding to threats. The balance between normalcy and preparedness required constant adjustment as the community refined its approach to collective security. The town's relationship with surrounding communities remained carefully managed to maintain its cover, while providing mutual support during emergencies. Millbrook's response capabilities during natural disasters and accidents enhanced its reputation as a community of unusually competent and well-prepared residents. 5 years after Victor's failed operation, Emily stood in the same library where she had once feared discovery by foreign operatives. The building hummed with activities that served both its public mission and its classified functions, while the town outside had achieved a unique balance between peaceful domesticity and defensive readiness. Her reflection in the library's windows showed a woman who had successfully integrated seemingly incompatible identities into a coherent whole. The gentle librarian and the deadly operative existed simultaneously within someone who had found a place where both aspects of her nature were valued and utilized. The children's laughter from the storytime area mixed with the quiet conversations of adults who had learned to live authentically while remaining perpetually vigilant. Millbrook had become proof that people with extraordinary pasts could build ordinary futures without sacrificing either their capabilities or their humanity. Emily's story was no longer about choosing between identities, but about creating space for complex individuals to contribute their full range of capabilities to communities that understood and valued their unique combinations of skills and experiences. The integration was ongoing and imperfect, but it offered hope for others seeking to transform lethal expertise into protective strength. The small-town librarian had indeed hidden a deadly secret, but the revelation had led not to destruction, but to the creation of something new. A community where extraordinary people could live ordinary lives, while remaining ready to defend both their peace and their neighbors against any threat that might emerge from the shadows they had once inhabited. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.